Hey there YouTube, I'm Ikitsu, this is the Ikitsu Times. Welcome to my channel, welcome to a little bit of Frostpunk in Retrospective. So, yeah, let's get straight into this review here without too much pomp or ceremony. Anyway, let's start off with, of course, getting rid of some of the sort of more, boring things to talk about, which to me, again, is always going to be things like graphics. So, in this particular game, I do think that this game has got fairly good graphics. I think that if you're playing a city builder game, you're not expecting like super high details or fidelity, but because this game sort of limits itself into a very small area, it's capable of getting away with a lot more detail than you're typically going to see in a lot of the buildings in other similar types of games. Like if I played Banish, the individual houses don't have this nice little smoke effect coming out over them. You don't get these big steam hubs with this sort of effect here. Everything looks a lot sharper, has a lot more detail in it than you would expect from this kind of game here. And I think that that's largely credited to the fact that you're not looking at a big sprawling city. You're looking at a very small, compacted sort of view here. And I think that that works out quite well for the experience. In addition, you're not going to get a lot of games that have got a lot of these tiny little details that I think are quite nice. Like, I love the sort of fact that there's just the mess hall line sign on this building here. Like, a lot of detail went into the individual construction of this, and I think that that works quite well with it. Next up, of course, is going to be the actual aesthetic here. The game borrows a lot from steampunk aesthetic, and I think that that should show from the name of the game as well, Frostpunk. It's a game that I think is not necessarily the most punk aesthetic of the things I've seen out there, but it's up there. It's got a pretty good showing as far as that type of thing goes, and I do think that it does what it does pretty competently there. The buildings themselves are usually pretty interesting looking. They've got like those neat little details that I was talking about there, and I think in terms of the aesthetic, it really adds to that sort of feeling of the period, because I feel like this game is supposed to take place during a specific time period of like the 1800s kind of thing there. It adds to that vibe there. It also adds a lot to the dreariness. A lot of the buildings feel quite cold, quite drafty, quite dreary, and yeah, that's all supposed to be part of what the game is about there, and I think that they do a fantastic job of really emphasizing that. And now, the only thing that I think is not necessarily that great about the aesthetic of the game here, the color is not necessarily the most interesting thing out there. If we take a look, especially now that this generator has shut down, we should start seeing everything gradually cover over in snow, and that's going to make everything look extremely samey as one another, and I think that that sort of ruins the experience just a little bit there. I would like it if the buildings, honestly speaking, the buildings should not be covered in snow. I know it's a visual indicator to tell you that the steam generators are down and that there's no heat in that area. Realistically speaking, at these sort of temperatures, it probably wouldn't be snowing. Maybe snow's just blowing into the city from like elsewhere. Maybe that's what's going on, but realistically speaking, there should not be new snow falling on these buildings and all at this point in time. It's just too cold for snow to be forming. Maybe more when it's minus 40 for the rest of the game or something like that. You could say that that's definitely the case. Maybe it could be snowing at minus 30. It's minus 30 where I live right now, but that happens, from time to time. But yeah, because of the fact that the buildings can look so samey when it's snowed in, I would prefer there was another visual indicator to tell me that these buildings were not being heated properly. I think that that would be something that would make the game a little bit more interesting. Now, when the city is heated, the buildings are pretty easy to differentiate from one another, especially like if you're zoomed out though, it can actually look fairly, whatever. It can look actually fairly, generic, a lot of the buildings. Once you sort of zoomed way out there, you can't really see what's going on anymore. It looks a little bit harder to tell what things are going on, where your buildings are and what's going on there. And I think the main reason why it's difficult to really differentiate your buildings at that point in time is because of the color grading. Even when the generator's on, a lot of the buildings have the same colors as one another. There's a lot of brown, especially in the later game, once you've got all these tents upgraded. They're kind of a weird color when they're tan color, I guess. Even then, that's light brown, honestly. The medical buildings have a little bit of blue to them, but most things just look like wood. That's kind of the overriding aesthetic to this game. I think that a little bit of color elsewhere, like just some color, making it a little more visually appealing, a little bit visually different, would go a long way to making this game look a little bit better. I don't necessarily know like how much I think that it needs as far as that goes, but it does need a little bit of something as far as that goes, and I'm not necessarily sure I know exactly how much that is, but it's something. There has to be something to make these buildings look a little bit different. Now, it's not a huge issue. It's just that like the big cities tend to look a little bit more bland than I would like in terms of the aesthetics there. But it's never really terrible either. It's not as though the look of the village, once it's at maximum size with 300 people, minus however many people I just left for dead with the bears by accident because I clicked the wrong button, minus that, the village always looks relatively similar. You're not going to get a dramatically better or worse looking city based on how you decide to build your stupid city here. So I do think that there should be like some more color. Like that's ultimately all I want, is a little bit of color in my life here. But other than that, though, the city looks quite good. I do think that the way that they've designed their buildings, the way that they've got them marked down and everything like that, it all looks pretty nice. I do think that that works pretty well. Not only that, though, there are the UI elements, and this is where I think the game actually really takes off here. I think the UI elements are actually really well done. Everything's quite clear, and when they aren't, you can mouse over them, and it tells you a lot of information about what's going on here. Not just a little bit like some games. Like if I go over coal, it tells me how many days I've got, and the fact that it is coal. Because this is icon, it's not necessarily... What's a good icon for coal? I'm not really sure there. Icon for wood, steel, steam cores. Steam cores is a little bit ambiguous because what the hell's a steam core? But, the game does a really quite decent job of telling you what everything is when you need to know what it is. I think that that's one of the big sort of strong points about the way they designed this game. The UI elements everywhere else, usually pretty clear as to what they're talking about. The one thing I'd say is like the number of people being treated and the number of people who are not being treated and the number of people who are hungry and stuff like that. It's a little bit small and out of the way, so if you're not looking explicitly for it, you might not know that that's sort of there and that that's something that you should be looking out for, but for most people, I think that that's not going to be a humongous issue or anything like that. I think you're going to have an easy enough time finding out what's going on in this game. So I think that just the overall appearance of this game, it does quite well. I think that it's a good-looking game. I think it's a very functional game. And it also has an aesthetic design that really sort of accentuates the ideas that it's sort of going for, the sort of tone that it's going for and everything like that, which I think is super important in a game like this. You definitely want to be focusing a little bit on that idea of tone and consistent presentation of like those sort of ideas. So anyway, for sound, I think that this game also is quite good here. I think that this is a game where they've gone for just a lot of layering on the idea of tone and atmosphere and stuff like that. The music here is very atmospheric. It's not in your face. It's not the core of the experience there. You're not going to listen to it and be pumped up by it. You're not going to listen to it and think, oh yeah, no, this is the sound. This is the music that I want the soundtrack to. It's not that kind of experience. You're really looking at a soundtrack that is giving you that sort of background ambience, and it's giving you that sort of background sensation that, this place sucks. This place is really, like, sad and depressive and, not a great place to live in. Everything's a little bit, like, dreary and everyone's going to die, which is exactly the feeling that you want to go for, in my opinion, in a game like this. I think that that works out perfectly. So I do think that they've sort of nailed that element there in terms of how the music works. Now, where I really like the sound design in this game, though, it's for the sound effects there. The sound of the people coughing in the background, the sound of the horn going off in the morning telling people to go to work, the sound of the bell coming in when they're supposed to come back in from work. The voice acting, I think, is actually quite good. The whispering wind in the background, that sort of chill wind sound that you'll get for that breeze, which I can't tell if that's part of the music or if it's an ambient background noise, but either way, it really sort of reinforces that idea that there's a sort of chill going on, and I really, really like that element to this game. So I do think that that's all of that is just something that I think is a massive strong point to this effective game, to the effects of this game here, and I think that that's going to be one of the things that you're going to probably find is a really strong element to it. And I mean, even a lot of the minor sound effects, like listen to the construction thing here. It feels very period appropriate, if that makes any sense. For a sound effect, that's quite amazing, because normally that's not something you get from sound effects. Sound effects are not usually something that, like, hitting a menu button doesn't usually give you that sort of sense of a steampunk aesthetic to it. I think that that was really well chosen, and the fact that they've sort of focused on that really works out quite well. You know, that sort of like doom and gloom sound whenever there's a pop-up that tells you an event is happening. It really reinforces the tone and ideas of this game, and I think that that all works together just so fantastically. I think it's one of the biggest strong points of this game here. So anyway, let's move on from all of the parts that I don't think are that important, even though I think this game really executes on them quite well, and it really actually does add to the experience in a way that I wasn't necessarily expecting all that much. But yeah, they've really gone ahead and made it a lot better as a result of that. But let's go on to the actual gameplay itself. Now, the gameplay is going to be a little bit, I think, polarizing depending on the sort of person that you are. I think there's a lot of people out there who prefer playing games for an element of like expression, city building games in particular, I mean. And I think that that's perfectly fine. In fact, I tend to like those sorts of games myself, where rather than trying to play these games so that I can solve a puzzle or something like that, it's all about trying to build a city the way I want that city to be, and that city is one that I want it to be, if that makes any sense there. And this isn't really that type of game, but this game is more like the scenarios that you would play in something like City Skylines or in SimCity. And in those sort of scenarios, you would be given something like, your roads are an absolute garbage truck fire, fix them so that people can actually function. And you'd say, okay, well, I'll figure out how to do that. And then you would fix the roads, and then you would, you know, go from there. You would potentially rebuild the city, but once you fix the roads, that was the scenario, you were done. That's sort of more like what this is. You've got a crisis, you have to solve it. Now, it does string together a series of crises, and it's a little bit sort of more cohesive in sort of way that it moves in that sort of sense there, but that's because that's the entire game. And this is, I think, where the major strength of this is, because in a game like SimCity or a game like City Skylines, it's not really designed for you to play those sort of scenarios, honestly speaking. It's more or less designed for you to play the freeform city building experience where you sort of design the city of your dreams. This is very antithetical to that. This is about surviving and getting to where you're supposed to go. And because of that, they're able to focus all of their effort on making the scenario fun. And I think they've done a really good job of that. The scenario is a puzzle that is interesting to try and solve. The problem with puzzles is that you can play it once, you can play it to optimize it until you've optimized it, but then you're done. And this is where I think the game sort of realized that, and they've developed a bunch of other scenarios, and they've got the second difficulty rating. You know, so once you've finished playing New Home on easy difficulty, I don't honestly know why I'm playing New Home on easy difficulty the second time. I don't really even think that it's probably just for this review, but once you've done that, you can just move on and play a different scenario, or you could play this one on a different difficulty. You know, anything other than playing this on the same difficulty in the same sort of way, because there's no point to it. I think that that's sort of one of the things that they've sort of realized, and so they've shoved in more of those experiences so that you could start sort of anew for this game without having to sort of, you know, just get a completely new game or something like that. So the fact that this doesn't have the sort of replayability that a more customizable city builder would have, I think that they sort of understood that, and despite that, I still think that this game is good value. I think that you're going to have a fun time playing through these scenarios because they are so well crafted. Normally, I would only ever play, I don't really play too many of these puzzle-type games. Like, I don't play very many of the Anno games, which I also think are more like a puzzle as opposed to a proper city builder. And you know, I think that this one does this sort of whole experience way better. And I think that this one is a much more well-paced, much more interesting experience compared to those other ones. So your mileage is going to vary. I think that there are different people for different sort of things out there. But I think that this one is one where I definitely enjoy playing it for that sort of reason. Other things about the gameplay itself there, I do think that it's interesting that you're capable of going through multiple paths, but I don't find that there's a huge amount of replayability within those other paths there. What I'm talking about here is the Book of Laws, of course, here. The reason is that, unless you just want to try and make a deliberately scumbag city for some reason, and you could, I mean, there's no reason not to, I guess. Usually the choices that you're going to pick are fairly obvious. Like I've selected a bunch here. Like, you could play again just for the sake of choosing organ transplants, or you could go for like, you know, child labor or something like that and make them work every job there, or you could make it so that everyone is constantly working 24 hours a day or something like that and just dying left, right, and center, or everyone's eating sawdust or something like that. But there's not really much reason to pick these options. Like, I think that this could have been more interesting, but ultimately I think that that one's just a series of bonuses that you pick when you want to get those bonuses. It's not really that that interesting and dynamic to the gameplay there. It really is just going to come down to you putting down the buildings and figuring out what the correct order to put them down in is, where to allocate your workers. That sort of puzzle element to it, I think, is all that really exists in this game in terms of like interest. So anyway, let's come to a sort of brief conclusion to this before I continue on here. So I would definitely recommend this game, especially to people who like games that are sort of puzzle city builders, is what I guess I should call them here. These are games that I think are designed to let you build a city, but are more interested in seeing if you can optimize your city as opposed to seeing if you can build a city from scratch. I think that that's sort of fair. So I think that the city builder, I think that this game is really one of the best examples of that type of game. So much so that even if you're the sort of person who wants to build a city of your own, it'll give you something interesting to do. It's not the most expensive game out there. There's some good replayability because of all the different scenarios out there. If you're dead set on just building your own city, it does have the option to go for an endless mode where that's what you basically do. You just turn off all disasters. I don't find that this game works very well for that personally because of how limiting it is in terms of both scope and scale and everything like that. And I think if you're looking for that kind of experience, it's a little bit slow as well. I think that this game is interesting because of the sort of challenges that it throws in your way as you're progressing through the game here. So I definitely would not recommend playing it in that sort of way there. Now, that being said there, if you're not interested in any sort of city building games, if you're not interested in any of those sort of optimization puzzle sort of games, if you don't like things like Factorio or RimWorld, you know, those are pretty far away from this type of game in terms of what they are. If you don't like any of those games, you're probably not going to like this one. This just isn't going to be for you. And I think that that's, fair. Recommend games for the sorts of people that are going to play them. I don't think that this is revolutionary enough that if you don't like city builders, you're going to like it. I don't think that it's quite revolutionary enough for that. So anyway, let's start talking about a little bit what this game isn't, because I think that's actually kind of important in context of what this game could have been. So this game was developed by the same studio that developed This War of Mine, and I've got some of the same gripes with this game that I had for This War of Mine. So if you haven't seen my review of that one, I believe I put it up on my blog, and I think I actually made a video of it, even though I didn't play it on my channel. So This War of Mine is a game that is an inferior puzzle game to this one. I actually disliked This War of Mine to a certain degree there. It was okay. It was one that was worth playing through to a certain extent when I bought it on sale. But it didn't have the same level of interest to this game, because as you play this game, you expand your city and the puzzle becomes more intricate and more intriguing as you sort of go along with it. That game, everything sort of stays the same for like the entire experience, which is why I thought it was a lot weaker. But that all aside, this game has some of the same problems that I found were emblematic of that. And mostly the problem I've got with these games is that they're a little bit pretentious, and I don't mean to be critical when I say that. There's nothing inherently wrong with being pretentious, in my opinion. I know there's a lot of people who think there is, but the way I use the word is that it tries to talk about topics that it then fails to really address in any meaningful sort of way here. And I definitely feel like both This War of Mine and Frostpunk do that. They have a lot to say about humanity and the struggles of humanity and the sort of work that they do, and the morality of things and the questioning of systems and authority and stuff like that, and what it takes to survive, and what when do you cross a line in trying to survive and stuff like that. But I don't think that they're particularly well equipped to ask those questions or say anything meaningful about them. And this is where I think that the game sort of could have gone from being one that I recommend to one that I would say, you know, is a must-play game for everyone just because it's got something interesting to say. It doesn't hit that high, and that's a shame to me because there's the real potential in this game that they could have gotten there. There's a lot of very, very interesting things about this game that they could have said, that they could have done in terms of their ideas about authority, about religion, about the way societies are run. But they never really understand the best ways to address those, in my opinion. Or even if they do understand the best ways to address those, they decide not to for whatever reason. And I think that's a tremendous shame because this game could have had really interesting ideas and voices to say about that kind of thing. Like, one of the things that I've got in terms of like a major problem with this one is the order tree. You already, at this point, before you've discovered that you need to do one of those things, live in a totalitarian dictatorship. You, as the player, are allowed to tell people when they're allowed to go to work. You tell them if they have to work 24 hours a day, working themselves literally to death. That's something that you can tell people to do. You've got the ability to go in and just very micromanage where people like live. You've got the ability to tell people if they're going to eat sawdust. You're going to be able to tell people if their children are going to be working in like a mine for the rest of their lives or whatever. Like, you're very much running a totalitarian dictatorship at the start of the game. And I guess the justification is that you are in a very extraordinary situation, and because of that, some certain level of compromise has to be reached. And, you know, okay, fair enough, maybe that's sort of true there. Maybe you do need to sort of have tighter rein because of the emergency. But can you imagine if instead of choosing between order and religion and just nothing, which is the way that you currently play this game, the way that you play this game currently is once you've chosen enough order things that you can just barely scrape by, you just don't get any more, or religion, you just get the ones that have a few positive benefits and have no negative impact on like people's freedom, and then you just are fine. The game doesn't judge you for that. It doesn't consider you being evil, whereas if you choose some sort of thing above an arbitrary line, they'll just say, oh yeah, no, that was the evil, you've crossed over the line, that was the line, that was where the line was, which I also think is a bit of a simplistic view of morality to begin with. But even taking that sort of into premise there, like, all you have to do to avoid that is just do nothing. But you're still a totalitarian dictatorship at the end of the day. So I think what would have been more interesting is if it gave you the option between totalitarian dictatorship, theocracy, or a democracy. But the democracy, instead of being bonuses, it would give you more hope and it would reduce discontent. But you would begin losing control of your city. You would stop being a totalitarian dictator that was capable of telling everyone what they could do. For example, you could have a new order that says that from now on you've got worker rule or something like that, and from then on you could no longer adjust people's schedules. People would adjust their own schedules. So if they felt like working longer in the iron mine, great, they would work longer in the iron mine. But if they felt like going home early, then suddenly they're going home early, which would be hugely detrimental. Now, there's a couple of reasons why I think that this would be more interesting from a moral standpoint here. First of all, it would actually make the game a bit more challenging. If the full democracy tree actually like ruined your ability to control your city, that would actually make the game really hard, and in a way that this game currently isn't. The problem with this game is not necessarily that it's easy, it's that once you figure out the solution, all that is required for you to avoid being, you know, considered or judged as evil by the game is knowledge of how to run the game. You can sort of say that it almost says that you're justified in being a totalitarian dictator if you know what you're doing. But I think that, you know, the idea that you lose control would make it much, much, much harder to actually play the game and succeed, which would be an interesting commentary about maybe like the way that societies are run and whether or not democracy is really a good thing. Can you sort of get through while still listening to the people? Would people's opinions and ideas be better? You know, that would be a comment on that sort of thing in a way that what we have currently isn't. Do I necessarily agree with that conclusion? Not necessarily, but I think that that would be at least something interesting to say. Now, you could also have it so that you weren't allowed to just like skip out on choosing something. So if you're in the order tree, you can't just stop taking stuff. You'd have to either choose your next order policy, or you'd have to choose a democracy policy. And you know, this would make it so that everything is a much harder choice there, and I think that that's something that this game would really benefit from in terms of the way that that commentary works about the morality of things. And I think as well, like, it would force a little bit of reflection from people who play these kinds of games. Like, I play these games because it gives me absolute control over an entire city and everyone in it. Playing it where it sort of forces me to reflect on the fact that that's the case, by stripping away that control and saying that that's the ethical thing to do, would be a much more profound statement than what they've currently got here, which was, you can still be a totalitarian dictator, you just can't have, you know, jackbooted thugs. I forget where the drawing line is in this particular game for the order side of things. You can have jackbooted thugs even, but I think it's when they start interrogating people that's when you cross the line. You're not allowed to interrogate people. It would be much more, you know, clear if they actually said torture people, because I'm pretty sure that's what they actually mean when they say that. But regardless of whichever they're actually meaning, you know, that is the gist of it. So I do think that that is just lost potential there. There's so much more that they could have said about the struggle of humanity and what it means and what's worth giving up and what's worth, you know, keeping, and, you know, whether those challenges are something that we can actually survive through or whatever. It just all sort of didn't manifest in any sort of meaningful or relevant or profound sort of way. And I think that that's a real shame, because that's something that was here that could have been here. And they could have said it, but they didn't, which is all the more disappointing. But I can't really fault them for not putting that in here, you know, because, you know, is that really something that's reasonable for me to say that they should have definitely thought that up, or do I necessarily know that that would have made the game better? Maybe it would have ended up being, you know, worse because of that or something like that. I'm not really sure. So, lastly, we're going to get into a very personal gripe about this game. The review in any relevant sense here is done. This is a person from a country which is currently experiencing minus 30 degrees Celsius temperature, minus 40 with the wind chill, talking about the design of this game from the perspective of a person who lives in cold weather, because this game does not really respect cold weather all that much. So anyway, first of all, this design, this is stupid as hell. I hate this. This generator here, look at this bright orange top here. That means that the metal up there is just ridiculously hot. And of course it is, that's sort of the point of this, but all of the heat from this stupid thing is being funneled up to the top of this and just being vented out into space, because, like, I guess they really decided that the sky was something you wanted to heat tremendously by burning huge amounts of coal to appease the coal gods or something like that. I don't know. Maybe they're trying to cause global warming. Maybe that's what they're trying to do here. I don't know. Even the steam hubs, like, over here, are exactly that. Like, these things are designed excruciatingly poorly. They need to design these things so that they're venting the heat downwards. They should not have this one at all, basically. Like, it should just be all steam hubs. The reason being that this stupid thing here, like, if it's somehow piping the hot heats, like, to these buildings that are adjacent to it, like, I don't know why they couldn't extend the pipes a bit further. Maybe there's some reason that you wouldn't be able to do that. I think that literally the reason that the buildings next to it are warm is because this damn thing is like 100 trillion degrees Celsius and then just venting it out into space, and any of the houses next to it are getting some of the adjacent heat, because, like, heat does go a little bit out to the sides there. It does radiate outwards. It's apparently not hot enough to, or efficient enough to radiate out to houses like this far away. If they had done this thing like just any other design, realistically speaking, they could be heating up the entire sort of crater with this generator here. But no, they've got this stupid thing. Like, I really hate that design there. The houses here, like, this house isn't the worst design in the world here, in terms of, like, what it could be doing for heat, but one of the things that the city needs more of is what you see in these buildings over here, and these also are designed poorly. Like, this building here has got this sort of, like, bridge here, a plus 15 for people who live in cities that have those, and these things are fantastic for cold weather. This, like, lets people, like, survive in cold weather, but The problem with it is they didn't build like the sides, so when you open the door to go from one building to the other, all the hot air like rushes out of the building. And like this is one of those rare instances where they would have been better off on the ground floor, going out the door, going into this door, and into the building. The reason is that like the bottom of the building is cooler than the top of the building. So what's happening is like all the hot air is escaping through the door out of a door that's at the top floor where all the heat is, and they're just like losing. If this was closed in, then all that heat would be contained within that hallway, and they would lose a lot less heat, and they could just have people going from building to building without any sort of problems with the temperature. So they're close to the idea as to what the hell they should be doing, but they aren't actually. They aren't getting it quite right there. So I think that that's just really, really stupid. I think that they should definitely have done something else other than that. I don't know. But a lot of the other buildings, I think, are just quite awkwardly designed here. Just in general, like this building design, other than the way that its plus 15 is built, if the plus 15 is fixed, this should be the default building design for like everybody. Oh shit, we've got this thing happening. Okay, whatever. Right, so yeah, like this should just be the default building design. The reason is that that ability to move from building to building without opening the door to the outside environment allows you to save up a huge amount of heat in your building without letting it release out to the outside. The fact that this is also a bit taller means that they've got the ability to put all their storage in the bottom floor and then have a lot more people like in the top two floors, which makes it feel like it's warmer than it really is on average. So I think that that's one of the really sort of important things that they've sort of missed about these buildings here. Also, a lot of these buildings are just ridiculous in terms of like how many windows they have. Like windows should not at all be like a priority for anybody in this stupid city here. And I think that you know, there's definitely the ability to build buildings without having to rely on windows. They just, you know, for whatever reason don't. Like there are other ways that they could have also built their windows, I guess. Like it's just what okay, so let's take a look over here. So here we can see like this big high window arched up here. That is so terrible. Like there's so much heat escaping from that. All the people are still coming out from the bottom floor, which is really like good ultimately, because this has that flaw that I was talking about earlier. But yeah, like this is a game that I think the buildings are designed by people who wanted to go for a cool aesthetic, and they did. I like the design of the building in terms of the way it looks, but oh god, are they ever so bad in terms of the way that they are designed for like cold weather. So yeah, I think this is a game where it would be interesting actually if you saw like a team from Russia or a team from Sweden or Finland or Canada doing the same things, but with a dramatically different architecture and without this stupid weird design engine that they've got in the middle here, and just have it like just inherently be much warmer and much more efficient. And then for the challenge part, you can just make it so that instead of going down, it would be like minus 70 instead of minus 40 right now, like at the same stage of the game here for the extra challenge. Like I think that that would be kind of interesting. In all honesty, I think that that would be potentially a good way of going about this whole thing. But yeah, I think that this game is one where they probably just went for gameplay. Like I can't honestly be too mad at them, despite like how angry I sound here. Like realistically speaking, they've got only so many things that they can do to make the game function. They probably aren't too concerned about making it so that like all the buildings would be realistic for this kind of thing. I should mention as well, like the temperatures that they use in this game are like completely fictitious, ridiculous kind of things here. The temperatures going down to minus 140, like carbon dioxide should be frozen at that temperature. People should not, like no one can survive at that temperature. That's not really what's happening here. But at the same time, like the entire civilization should just be wiped out as soon as it hits like minus like 60, minus 70 thereabouts. It's just that kind of sort of situation there. Like you couldn't survive those kind of temperatures. So it's already kind of fiction. I think that like it's already supposed to not look like reality in that sort of context there. But yeah, like that's just non-coherent rant. You really don't have to pay too much attention to it, in my opinion, because, like, again, this isn't really ultimately that important to the game itself as a whole. It's just, you know, important to me because I'm currently living in minus 40 degree temperature, including the wind chill. I'm not sure if the minus 40 in this game is like with wind chill or without wind chill. Again, it's like, it's also snowing, it's minus 40 out. It definitely does not snow at minus 40. Just can't. So, you know, that's lovely. But in any event, that's going to be our review of Frostpunk. Again, despite my complaints about this, it is a good game. What is there is a good game. It's just a game that had the potential to be a really great game, and I think that that's a little bit disappointing that didn't manifest there. So anyway, I hope you found this episode enjoyable, and of course, as always, I hope to see you guys all next time.